All right, AP World History crew, let's do this. We're about to tackle a super high-yield review of Unit 9, Globalization, covering 1900 all the way to today. So if you're cramming for that big exam in May, you have definitely come to the right place. Let's dive in and make sure you're ready to crush this part of the course.
So, right off the bat, why should you care about this unit? Simple. It's about 8 to 10% of your entire AP exam. Now, that might not sound like a ton, but think of it this way. These are some of the most gettable points you're going to see. Nailing this unit is a huge boost to your final score.
So what is globalization really? When you boil it all down, Unit 9 is about one single, massive story. It's the story of how our world got so connected. We're talking about a crazy acceleration in technology, in economics, in culture that totally changed the game for everyone on the planet over the last 100 years or so.
Okay, so here's our game plan. We're going to break it down. First, we'll look at the engine behind all this connection, the technology. Then we'll jump into the global marketplace that it created. From there, we'll check out how ideas and culture started spreading like wildfire. And we'll wrap it all up by looking at the big picture, what's actually new and what's just, well, more of the same old story. Let's get into it.
First up, the engine of connection. Look, if you want to understand globalization in the 20th century, you have to start with technology. It's the absolute core of the story. These new inventions didn't just make the world feel smaller, they wove us together in ways that were literally unimaginable before. And as you'll see, that brought some amazing progress, but also a whole new set of problems.
The big idea here is that we basically conquered distance. Think about it. Back in the 1920s, you have the radio. Suddenly, a leader like FDR can talk to the entire nation at once with his fireside chats. Fast forward to the 60s, and it's television. Now, the Vietnam War isn't some faraway thing. It's right there in your living room every night. And then, bam! The internet hits in the 90s and just throws out the entire rulebook on how we communicate. Each step collapsed the space between us.
Okay, this is one of my favorite parts, because it's about something you never think of as world-changing. A simple metal box. The shipping container. Seriously, before the 1950s, loading a ship was a chaotic, expensive mess. But once they standardized the container, everything changed. It became ridiculously cheap and fast to move goods around the world. And that is what allowed companies to say, hey, why don't we make our stuff over there where labor is cheaper? It completely redrew the economic map of the world.
And it wasn't just communication and trade. Technology totally revolutionized our health. You've got antibiotics like penicillin, which meant getting a bacterial infection was no longer a likely death sentence. We developed vaccines that practically wiped out killer diseases like polio. And then there's birth control, the pill, which in the 50s gave women a level of control over their lives that fundamentally changed societies everywhere.
But here's the catch, and this is super important for your essays, it was a total double-edged sword. Sure, we got better at fighting old diseases, but being so connected also meant new diseases could spread across the globe in a flash. Sound familiar? Think of the 1918 flu, or, COVID-19. Meanwhile, you still had diseases of poverty like malaria hanging around in poorer regions, and as we started living longer, we faced new challenges, like Alzheimer's. So pro tip for the exam, whenever you talk about technology, always discuss the good and the bad. It's a perfect complexity point.
And of course, there was a huge environmental price tag for all this progress. More people and more factories meant we needed more resources. So, forests were cleared for farms at an alarming rate. We burned tons of fossil fuels, which led to horrifying air pollution, like the Great Smog in London in 1952, that literally killed thousands. This was the beginning of the big modern debates about pollution, deforestation, and eventually, climate change.
Okay, so we've got the tech, now let's follow the money. How did all these new connections reshape the world's economy? We're moving into the global marketplace, where a whole new economic system took over, creating massive wealth for some and a whole lot of anger from others.
So the dominant economic idea that really takes hold in the late 20th century is something called neoliberalism. It sounds complicated, but the core idea is pretty simple. Less government, more free market. The thinking was if you just let businesses compete with fewer regulations, everyone will be better off. This was the playbook for leaders like Ronald Reagan in the US and Margaret Thatcher in the UK. They pushed hard for deregulation, privatization, and lower taxes. And this new system led to a massive reshuffling of jobs around the world. You started to see a new division of labor. On one side, you had the developed countries, the so-called knowledge economies, like the US or Finland, focusing on things like software, finance, and design. And on the other side, all those manufacturing jobs, making clothes, electronics, you name it, moved to places like Vietnam or Mexico, where the labor was a lot cheaper. Remember the shipping container? This is where it really comes into play.
Yeah, so not everyone was cheering for this new global setup. A huge pushback started to build, the anti-globalization movement. Their argument was pretty straightforward. This whole system is rigged. They said it puts corporate profits ahead of everything else. Workers' rights, environmental protection, you name it. They saw a world of rising inequality and exploitation.
And that simmering anger just boiled over in 1999. In Seattle, during a meeting of the World Trade Organization, the streets just exploded. You had this incredible mix of people, union workers, environmentalists, students, all coming together to protest. They literally shut the city down. The Battle for Seattle, as it was called, was a massive wake-up call that showed the world there was a real, powerful, and organized opposition to this new global order.
Okay, we've talked tech, we've talked money, but globalization is also about what's inside our heads, our ideas, our music, our values. So next up, we're diving into this world of shared ideas. We're going to look at global culture, the rise of human rights, and the big international groups we created to try and manage this brand new interconnected planet.
Man, culture just started flying everywhere. And yeah, for sure, American culture was a huge export. Think Hollywood movies and Coca-Cola being everywhere. But, and this is key, it wasn't just a one-way street. Not at all. You have India's Bollywood pumping out more movies than Hollywood. You have K-pop from South Korea taking over the world, thanks to things like social media. And then you have these massive global events like the Olympics or the World Cup that billions of people watch together. It's a much more complex mix than just Americanization.
This era also saw people coming together across borders to fight for change. A huge starting point was the UN's Universal Declaration of Human Rights back in 1948. This was a radical idea that every single person on Earth has certain basic rights, no matter what. And that idea became the fuel for so many other movements. The fight for women's rights went global. The push to end apartheid in South Africa, led by figures like Nelson Mandela, became a worldwide cause. You also see global movements for environmentalism, like Greenpeace, and for economic justice, like the Fair Trade movement.
So with all this connection, you need some referees, right? That's where institutions like the United Nations come in. And the UN has done some really important stuff. It's a place for countries to talk instead of fight, and its agencies like UNICEF do amazing humanitarian work. But it's also got some major flaws. The biggest one is the Security Council, where just 5 countries have veto power, which can basically paralyze the whole organization. And because of that, the UN has failed tragically at times, like its inability to stop the genocide in Rwanda in 1994.
All right, let's bring it all home. This is probably the most important skill for the AP exam: continuity and change over time. So we've had this crazy century of globalization. The big question is, what's fundamentally different about the world now? And what's just the same old story in new clothes? The changes are massive, right? We can talk to anyone, anywhere, instantly. Our economies are tangled together like never before. We have global institutions like the UN. But look at what stayed the same. That big economic divide between the rich countries of the global north and the poorer countries of the global south, that's still very much a thing, a hangover from the age of empires. We definitely still have wars and conflict. And for all the talk of a global culture, people are fiercely protective of their local traditions and identities, sometimes even more so because of globalization.
So if you remember one thing from Unit 9, make it this: the world is more connected than ever before, for better and for worse. That's the whole story. It's created incredible opportunities and wealth, but it's also made us vulnerable to new problems, made old inequalities even worse, and created totally new reasons to fight. It's messy, it's complicated, and that's the point.
And that brings us to the big, final question, the one that history always leaves us with. As our world keeps getting more and more tangled together, how do we deal with all these challenges? How do we fix the inequality and handle all these competing interests to build a future that's actually sustainable and fair for everyone? There's no easy answer, but that's what thinking like a historian is all about. All right, that's it for Unit 9. Good luck on that exam. You've got this.